If you have ever visited a university campus with the intention of witnessing to somebody, it will not take long before you run into this guy.
So it's for these reasons that we believe marriage should remain, as Jesus defined it, a union of one man and one woman.
Not so fast, preacher man. Behold, it is I, Horus, Egyptian god of the sun. And while you were busy indoctrinating these idiots with your medieval mumbo-jumbo, I, Horus, was busy discovering a very ancient Egyptian scroll that will most assuredly unveil the heights of your hypocrisy and send your silly little Jesus cult crashing to the ground.
And what is the name of this very ancient Egyptian scroll that you just discovered?
www.atheistmixologist.neildegrasse-tyson is my homeboy / hey Christians, why you no follow your fairy tale book.blogtown.net.
Ah, yes, the internet theologian. What are these scholars typically equipped with to undermine Christianity completely? That's right, Old Testament law confusion.
And what did you learn from this very reliable and meticulously researched source?
Well, you see, preacher man, while it may be true that your sacred scriptures forbid a man from lying with another man, it's also true that they forbid you from eating pork or shellfish. And since your congregation feasted mightily upon a tray of bacon-wrapped scallops at your most recent potluckings, it appears you are all guilty of picking and choosing which passages of the Bible you live by. So because you're all so terrible at worshipping your Lord, you might as well worship me instead.
Rise, Peter, kill and eat.
My name is Horus.
No, I'm quoting from Acts chapter 10. Are you familiar with the book of Acts or perhaps the book of Galatians?
Is Horus in those books?
No.
Then they bore me.
Ah, yes, the lack of willingness of the atheist to actually, study the Bible. What do we do with these canards? Hey, do you ever wear a blended fabric sweater? Hopefully not. Do you ever eat shellfish? Do you have a fence around the roof of your house? Those are Old Testament laws. What do we do with those? Well, I'm glad you asked. There are historically 3 ways of dealing with Old Testament laws. That's right. When we read the Old Testament and we see the column after column and just more laws and how to punish and how you're supposed to think, how you're supposed to act, what you're supposed to eat, historically, I have understood there to be 3 ways of dealing with those. Do those apply to us? Do they all just go away? Are we supposed to be keeping those things? Some people try to do that. What are the 3 historic ways? Number 1, all Old Testament laws gone. Why? Because of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews is about better. Jesus is better than angels. He's a better high priest, and we are living under a better covenant prophesied by Jeremiah, fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Therefore, the old covenant completely, every single law gone. Unless the New Testament says this one is still in place, or unless there is a principle from those laws that would carry forward. What sort of principles? Well, anything about morality that is in alignment with God's character and nature, of course, the principle would still be in place, but the power of the law would be gone. In other words, you don't get punished if you don't keep them by the state. That is one way of dealing with all of the Old Covenant laws, and I'm going to tip my hand. I fall into this camp. I didn't always, but I think this is the best way of dealing with the Old Testament laws because of the Sabbath. 9 of the 10 commandments are reiterated in the New Testament, but 1, the Sabbath, which is why I believe we can worship on Sunday or any other day if we so choose, and we're not under all of those Sabbath rules. The number 2 way of dealing with all of the Old Testament laws is just the opposite of this. All of the Old Testament laws are in place unless the New Testament says, pfft. So it's the opposite way of dealing with this. They're all gone, they're all active unless. Now, what's the difference? Well, when you bore down a little bit, you get into some difficulties with things like the Sabbath, some technicalities, which is why I fall into the first category. Now, the third way of dealing with all of these Old Testament laws is a system I'll call the three-column system. Some theologians decided when you take a look at the Old Testament laws, they seem to be broken up into three categories. The moral laws, sexual issues, how you're supposed to talk and think that seem to be in alignment with God's moral character. These are absolutes and they never go away. But then you've got the civil laws. If you break this law under the power of the land of Israel, you get punished like this. And then there are the ceremonial laws, sacrificial stuff. Why do they break them up into three columns, three categories? Well, because the ceremonial laws, they read Hebrews and say, well, clearly they're gone because Jesus was the last sacrifice. But what about the civil laws? Because we're no longer Israel, they don't apply to us right here today. But the moral principles, they still do. Now, these are all three valid ways of dealing with the Old Testament laws.